Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, an early example of extreme horror, The Flesh Eaters by L.A. Morse. So I heard about this book through a new booktube channel, Pulp Fiction, which I definitely recommend if you like this kind of grimy older book, the kind of book that I really tend to enjoy. So yeah, I'll leave a link in the description to this video to his video review of this book. Do check out his channel. He's talking about some really interesting stuff that I hadn't heard about before, including clearly this book. So this is a book that originally came out in 1979 and it definitely feels like an early example of extreme horror. It's not necessarily massively graphic all the way through. The way it describes the violence is often quite kind of matter of fact, but it's just unrelenting. It's a bit like Jack Ketchum's work in that it keeps on layering on more and more brutality. It is definitely a difficult book to take at times. The subject matter is often very horrific, but I found it an interesting read. I didn't love it, and I'll tell you the reasons for that as we go through this review. But if you like extreme horror, if you like disturbing fiction, it's definitely a book that's worth checking out, especially as it's now available digitally. So I think it was out of print for quite a while. Will Erickson featured it on his Too Much Horror Fiction blog, which became the inspiration for the Paperbacks from Hell book, and I suspect prices of second-hand copies have escalated as a result of that, but you can get it digitally now, which is how I read it. And the thing that's interesting about this book is it's based on a supposedly true story. So it's set in kind of 15th, 16th century in Scotland, and it's about a guy called Sawney Bean, who apparently was a real figure. I think there's a bit of debate about how much of the kind of story of his life is true and how much of it is a legend that's grown over time. But there definitely seems to be some truth in it. So Sawney Bean and his girlfriend were kind of outcasts from Scottish society and ended up living in a cave, and from that cave they preyed on local travellers. Over time they had a family, so the girlfriend became pregnant, and that family grew and grew and became a team of hunters who would go out and hunt unwary travellers, bring them back and cannibalise them. So they would butcher them, they would pickle their body parts, and they would eat them. And if that concept of a cannibal family sounds familiar, then it is the case apparently that the Sawney Bean story was one of the inspirations for Wes Craven's movie The Hills Have Eyes. It may also have been an inspiration for Jack Ketchum. So his book Off Season, which came out the year after The Flesh Eaters, definitely features something similar, albeit transplanted to the US rather than taking place in Scotland. Whether Ketchum actually read The Flesh Eaters or not, I don't know, but there's definitely similarities between the two stories. Now, I've said on the channel before in some of my reviews of disturbing books that I think two of the themes that crop up again and again in disturbing books are cannibalism and incest as two of the greatest taboos that human society has. And there is definitely a lot of incest as well as a lot of cannibalism in The Flesh Eaters. So as you probably guessed from my description of the story, you start with two people and you end up with a massive clan. So there is clearly incestuous relationships going on between the members of that family. And some of those are described very graphically, so there is a lot of disturbing stuff in this book. But as I said, it's not necessarily the graphic nature of some of the content, it's more the repetition of it and the fact that things gradually escalate over time. The book is written in a really matter-of-fact way, to the extent that you kind of come to accept what's happening after a while. I found I'd read a bit of it and kind of not be okay with it exactly, but I wouldn't be terribly shocked by it. But then I'd put the book down and go and make a cup of tea and kind of think about it and realise what I'd just read. And that's when the horror really hits you. So it's an interesting technique. That matter-of-fact style almost reads a bit like a textbook. And in fact, in terms of the way the book is split up, there is quite a lot of history in here. There's a lot of discussion of kind of politics in the local town and things like that. So it's a book that kind of ends up being about 50% cannibalism, 25% incest and 25% history. And as I say, that approach can mean that the impact of some of the scenes is dulled a bit. The other problem, or slight problem, that I have with the book is there's nobody to root for in it. So you don't become attached to any of these characters. You're more like an impartial observer watching what goes on. And what goes on is, definitely really horrific. But because you don't have an emotional bond with any of the characters, it doesn't have as much impact as something like The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum, where you really become invested in the lives and the suffering of the characters. So this is a book I would classify more as interesting than truly successful. It's definitely a book that I think fans of extreme horror and disturbing fiction should check out because it's quite an early example of this kind of thing. But it's not as impactful as I think it might have been in the hands of a different writer. It's that lack of a character to really associate with as a reader which I think holds it back. Anyway, hope you found that interesting. Do let me know in the comments if you've read The Flesh Eaters and what you thought of it. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.